Hello, everyone. This is JD Calderon, and this is Indie Comics Explained. And today I bring you another fabulous guest. But before we do that, please like, subscribe, share out the show. Let everyone know we're here. Let everyone know that we're bringing you excellent indie creators almost every day, 4 times a week, sometimes 5. But we're here, and we're here for you. And please, currently I have a Kickstarter running for Tall Tales 1 through 5. Please go check it out. And like I said before, like and subscribe. And without further ado, our guest, Brian K. Morris.
Oh, hello there. Good evening. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing, Brian?
I'm awesome. I'm improving with every passing second now.
That's good to hear. All right, so let's jump right into it, Brian. So now I know you're an author. You write comics, right? You're a publisher. You've been doing this for a minute, right? There you go. Exactly. So you've been. Oh, there you go, Skyman. There you
go. Keep going. Keep going.
Oh, there it goes. Oh, more books.
More books. Nice. Don't let me interrupt you. Keep going. Tell everybody how awesome I am.
All right, it's incredible. So you, like I said, you've been in this game for a long time. Now.
Yes.
Now, how long have you been in this game? I mean, I don't want to date you or anything, but you know.
No. I am not at all sensitive about my age, frankly. I'm just tickled I got this far. But I've been a writer ever since I was in single digits, and it all stems from comics, which is how I learned to read. Initially, I was a huge Superman fan, and that's why when I went to first grade back then, I was the only kid in class who could spell the word invulnerable because I read in all the Superman books, right. You know. And and I've loved comics all my life, since at least 3 years old is the earliest I can remember. And even then, I was just looking through the pictures. I didn't really comprehend reading immediately, oddly enough. But as far as writing, I've been writing. I used to make up my own stories because, it's like, I'm done with Spider-Man. Well, gosh, I want more Spider-Man. Well, I'm going to make up a story with, Spider-Man's battling Dr. Octopus, and what the heck, Batman's going to swing in, and, Thunder Agents are going to show up. I had all these weird plot lines going in my skull, and eventually I started trying to submit to comics, scripts and such, did my own publishing, mini comics, little photocopied comics back in the mid 80s and again in the early 90s. And then I got into real writing, right. Journalism and stuff like that, because I had a 2-year degree. I might as well get some use out of it. And eventually 8 years ago, almost exactly, I had a 9-to-5 job that I got fired from. Okay. And I'm like, dear Lord, what am I going to do? And I remember looking at a clock in the room where I was at, and it was one of those things where it was corporate bookkeeping. Somebody had made a mistake that cost the company money, and myself, along with about 24 other people in the state of Illinois, were let go. Wow. I got to keep his job. Okay, so yeah, this, we all know the pecking order here. So, right. But while I'm looking at the clock, and all the things that run through your head when you're fired, and you've got a really good job with bennies and everything, and I'm like, when's the bills aren't going to stop coming? How am I going to support a family? How am I going to get the mortgage going? And then I realized I've got a second gig already. It's the writing. Now we'll concentrate on it while we're looking for another job, and either it becomes plan A or I find another plan A, but I'll still do plan B because I dig it. Right. And it was funny because during the course of looking for another job, part of my severance package involved being with a re-employment agency where they teach you how to interview, how to dress for the occasion, how to write a good resume, etc. Well, they had a webinar one day, and it's the only time they ever had it. And it was on electronic publishing. And I was completely unaware of what it was like, because I was thinking back many years before where you tried to send your manuscript to the various, mainstream publishers. or you try to find an agent, or you publish it yourself through Vanity Press, who I have a extreme loathing for. But that's one of my hot buttons. But anyway, I listened to this and all I saw was potential. And then I found out it also extends to comics. That, print on demand, POD, I don't have to do like 5,000 copies of this and then store the other 4,995 in my garage. I just get as many as I know I can sell. So it takes care of that inventory problem and wrapping up your money. Same with comics, that you can order 25 at a time or whatever. More, you maybe get a discount on them. But, that's when I started going into regular, into book publishing, and then eventually into comic books. I started writing for other people. And 2 years ago, I brought out my own comic. And currently I'm working with a couple of publishers on getting more comic work out. So
cool. Now, what was some of the prior works that you've done? Because you said you've written for some other publishers as far as comics. What are some of the books you've done in the past?
For Buy More Comics, that's BIMOR Comics. Get it? See what he did there? And my friend Sean Delaney asked me if I would write a story. There is a real place called Metropolis. It's in Southeast Illinois. It is the only metropolis in the zip code directory. And every year they have the Superman celebration, okay? And they have this beautiful classic theater there. It's probably now around 90 years old. And we wanted to help raise some money for it. Well, my friend Sean Delaney, who had published some works of his own, some comic works, he asked if I wanted to help write one of the stories in there. And so I wrote an old Jerry Siegel character called Nature Boy from Charlton Comics in the 50s. And that's where I met Eric Hawkins, who is one of my current collaborators. And then that led to a second issue where we brought back the Purple Claw. Hawkins, who... Yeah, there we go. That sounds familiar. Anyway, the Purple Claw was another obscure public domain character, and this led to other scripting gigs for other publishers. And 2 years ago, I ran a successful Kickstarter campaign to bring back an old character called Spencer Spook that appeared in Giggle Comics. He was kind of like Casper, but he had an attitude. Casper would be like, "Oh, those people are so mean to me. I just want to be friends." And and Spencer's like, "Did you see how they treated me? Here, hold my beer. I'm going to go get him." He didn't take a lot of crap, and I like that. And since then I've been working. I worked for about 3-4 years for a small comic publisher in the Oak Park, Illinois area, where we've put out one issue of a book that is loosely based on the legends surrounding one of the most haunted cemeteries in America, Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. And I wrote a book, a companion book to that. And currently I am working with a lady named Kadrolsha Carol, who is the real-life queen of the paranormal. That's Kadrolsha in back there. Nice. And she's a psychic and she's a healer. And I've also been writing comic stories about her, as well as another dear friend, Master Ron Fitzgerald, the master of dark, sticky magic. And that kind of gives you the tone of what his late night magic shows are like. Actually, he's an illusionist. I need to make that distinction. But I've been doing a lot of freelancing for a whole lot of people. I've got some stuff coming out from Empire Comics Labs, and currently am working with a group of people on a newly minted comic company. In fact, I write the notes down because I sometimes get aphasia and forget names. Terraform Comics. So so we've been putting together some new stuff, and I'm sure some of them might be pulled out of me during the course of this interview. You never know, but given I'm so shy about talking about what I do. Anyway.
So let's unpack some of that earlier stuff, because you had said something important. Because one of the things, this is Indie Comics Explained, so I like to explain certain aspects of publishing and printing to some of the viewers. Sometimes people just don't know about some of these things. So your button question, or your button, Vanity Publishing, what is it exactly? Like, Give me a quick explanation and what exactly is it about it that you despised?
Okay, vanity publishing. Well, in regular books, it used to be a printer, and you just take your book to them. They print your book, no editorial oversight, no double checking, none of that stuff, and then they give you the book. And this is before we had the internet, so there was hardly any way to market it effectively. And even now, people have trouble marketing their work. But anyway, now there's a new breed of them. And I see a little bit of it in comics, too, where it's kind of pay for play, right. Where people say, well, we'll put you in print. We'll guarantee you a bestseller. We'll guarantee you get in comic shops. I guarantee they'll go to hell one day because you're making promises they can't keep. And what really annoys me about vanity publishers of all stripes is that they are taking advantage of people who, with just a little bit of research, minimal research, could do all this stuff themselves. I'm practically a one-man band as far as production goes, except in terms of Photoshop, which I am totally ignorant about. But I'm going to give your listeners a place where they can find all the information they want. Now, we got to keep the secret, though. It's just between you and me, though, okay?
Okay.
It's called Google.com. You go there, seriously, it's like you just type your question. How do I, for instance, how do I find a penciler? How do I write a comic script? How do I do pre-press, if you want to get fancy and use the terminology? And someone has the answer on the internet. Number one runner-up, though, as far as information, is where we're at right now, YouTube. There's channel after channel of people who are willing to help other creators get their work in print. And it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg. You're going to pay sweat equity, though. You're going to put in some work, as you know. But all the information's out there, which is the remarkable thing about the interwebs.
Yes. No, I just find it important because some people just don't realize, what exactly a vanity press is and what they do. Because back in the day, I would look at them and I'd be like, wait a second, you're going to charge me X amount for editing, right? And then you're going to charge me X amount for printing my book. And if you check their printing prices versus you just going to a printer, you'll see there's a huge gap. And it's just like, wow. Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
Some people don't realize how much you can do yourself and don't do the homework like you did.
Right.
And it's just the idea that somebody is taking advantage of somebody who doesn't know what they don't know, and that's what annoys me. And people, there is no reason for anyone to go into debt to do what we do. Right. If you want to do it all yourself. There is nothing stopping anyone to being a comic book publisher. And if you do it right, you could even get in Diamond or whoever's going to replace them at this point, or not replace them, but complement them, I should say. So, it's all doable. The information is out there. It's just a matter of looking for it or finding someone who can be a mentor to guide you through the choppy waters.
Yeah, and there's plenty of people for that. They can just as easily contact me. They can contact yourself, and more than happy to share the information. It's not that hard.
Oh yeah, and I've stolen every bit of information that I've ever given. So I thought I had honestly one piece of information that I thought, man, I came up with something brilliant here, and 90% of the people I've told it to are like, yeah, and I do that already. And I was like, okay, I give up. I'm just
right.
So.
No, I got you. Now, let's go a little bit into writing. So, when you're obviously working with artists, right? So, what type of script style do you utilize? Are you utilizing, let's say, a full DC style script? Or are you using like a Marvel type where you're just giving a brief outline and the artist will go and do their thing? You'll come back later and script it up. How exactly are you working this?
I have always done it DC style. Partly because many of the artists I've worked with want a script. They want some kind of guidance. And because I work with a lot of, shall we call them, newer writers that they don't feel confident pacing it. You notice that some of the best people at the job, like say in Marvel and DC from the 70s on up to like a decade ago, a lot of them are older, more experienced artists like Jack Kirby, John Buscema, John Romita, everyone that they had already trained by following other people's scripts. Now, I can show you, hopefully this will come across on the air, but this is, it's kind of like a movie script or a play script, because I used to be a playwright. And it's basically breaking down the panels, breaking down the pages, then breaking down the panels, and separating everything into the visuals to be followed by everything the letterer will be in charge of, such as dialogue, captions, sound effects, etc. So it's and I try to format it in such a way so that everything is clearly separated from each other. Like if you read play scripts or screenplays, that the various sections, like all of the stage instruction, the movement of the actors and the camera, share a left border, whereas the dialogue is further in. And then you have like certain directions to the actors themselves, whether it's the emotion or the movement, and that's even further in, and there's a specific place for that. So that's kind of where my script writing evolved. It's the one thing about scripts, there are no one way to do it, but I just feel that this is the way that I think makes it easier for the rest of my creative team to know, okay, I'm looking in this area here. This is what I need to know to get through the job. So,
Got you. Now, since you have a lot of experience at this, so you've worked with artists. What is one of the things that artists do that most, I don't want to say make you angry, but like concern you? Or where do you think there's an opportunity where you could be like, okay, there's obviously some disconnect between myself and the artist, and it could be something that maybe you did on your end, maybe sometimes is on their end. So what was one of the situations, or one or two of the situations that you've encountered like this, and how did you fix that? Like, how did you work that out with them?
Well, probably the worst thing that ever happened was during my amateur press days in the 80s. I had one person who promised upon the graves of every ancestor he ever had that he would follow my script to the letter. And then somewhere around the bottom of page 1, some things just don't start to look familiar. And then by the time you're like halfway through page 2, it's like he's gone off on his own. And I don't mind when an artist has a better way to do a scene, because I think in words. They think visually, and I think it's when I do my job in describing the scene properly, which I admit I have about a 98% success rate. Okay. Occasionally I get one where I just can't quite get that movie in my head onto the page, and then I suffer the scorn of my artist, Eric Hawkins. I'm talking to you anyway.
You, Eric, you.
Yeah, seriously. And I'm not saying he's wrong either, because and I try to be mindful of that, because years ago I remember it was Al Milgrom, who used to be an editor, writer, artist for both DC and Marvel. He said that one of the first scripts he ever got as a professional described a panel where two men were standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder, staring straight ahead into each other's eyes. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Even I know that, but that's the worst. When somebody doesn't follow the script. But fortunately, people like Eric, I love you, Eric Hawkins. Every artist I've worked with has been good enough to say, "Hey, listen, I don't understand this. Can we talk it out?" And then something comes out of that, and it's strong. Now, the second worst thing that's ever happened was I wrote a script for someone else who had hired an artist who English was not his first language, nor his second, nor his 17th. So he ran my scripts through Google Translate.
Yes.
which is kind of like blindfolding yourself and sprinting into the middle of a minefield. And so, like, and I wrote this story based on somebody else's outline, the publisher's outline. And he's like, this person has to be an Egyptian. This person has to be somebody from the early 1900s. This person has to be, I'm like, fine, I'm the hired hand. I will do this thing. And so I wrote the script dutifully. And then I'm coming back to proof the stuff, to proofread what the artist has done. And instead of this ancient Egyptian pharaoh, I'm seeing an Indian straight out of the Village People. And I'm like, where did this come from? And I couldn't get the publisher. He said, you're going to get mad if I tell you the truth. And I said, well, I'm not real pleased right now. Tell me the truth. So and then that's when I found out the Google Translate, and everybody knows how accurate Google Translate is. And so I'm like, get him to redraw it, right? And he's like, oh, no, it's okay. You can just rewrite the script.
So much for it to be like,
it's gonna be this, gonna be that. So it's incidents like that drive me back into the comfortable womb of self-publishing, where the boss is still an idiot.
Right.
But just the same, I don't have to go far to blame the person, and I'm a little more, I'm mostly more forgiving. So.
Got you. That's cool. So as far as process goes, when you sit down and you start to first construct a story, okay? So now, are you the type that constructs a story, or do you sit down and just what they like to call a pantser? You just sit down and you just go to work, or do you like to sit down and like break it down beforehand, construct? Like, what's your process?
My process is very similar in both comics and in regular prose. I like to plot it out. Now, sometimes if I'm writing like a 1 to 4 page story. Usually I have the structure in my head and I do some pantsing, and then it's and then it's easy enough to shuffle with that sort of moderate length. But when you're doing like a 20-page story or longer, if you have to change something in the beginning, I think if you do it right, that's going to change the rest of the script. Right. And so for longer pieces, I do tend to at least know I know all the drama points and the things I really need to have into the script to make it work. And then I start breaking it down. Here's the big plot. Okay, now we divide it into pages. Now we divide it into panels, etc. And with the goal of writing as few panels as possible. And it's not to save me trouble, but mostly it's to save my artist trouble, because what a lot of people don't realize is you see these beautiful splash pages, you see these beautiful full page illustrations. Well, a standard comic story is like 3 to 9 beautiful illustrations, and the same kind of care has to be given to the 9-panel Watchmen style grid as you do for a 4-panel Jack Kirby slugfest. And I try to, I keep talking about making my scripts more artist friendly, and that's one of the things where I try to put everything in as few panels as possible for the artist's sake, to make it a little more, easy on them. At least I hope so.
Right, you're a kind man.
I try. I care about my artists. Well, that's the thing. It's like some artists get this idea they don't need people like me, which I don't want to. I don't want them to get that notion, however true it may be. Right. And I admit I have seen, and not just in independent comics, but in mainstream comics as well, where this person has no reason to call themselves a writer. But anyway, I am good. I am glad that just about everybody I've worked with has been a great storyteller. Right. And that's the key to a good synthesis of comic art between the writer and the artist, in my opinion. You look at the Lee and Kirby, or Simon and Kirby, or Claremont and Byrne, Claremont and Cockrum, where the artist brings their A game to every panel and can tell that story, and then it falls on the scripter, the typist, if you will, to bring nuance to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I said, when it works beautifully, and that's why this is such an amazing medium to work for and to read.
Yes, I agree. So let's talk about Rising Tide Publications. I mean, how long have you been doing that? There you go.
Not that I like to promote or anything. Hi, kids. Anyway, Rising Tide. You mean Rising Tide Pub? Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, no. Seriously, when I started this in 2012,
right,
my original concept was called Freelance Words, because I admit, I think it may have been the shock of losing this relatively cushy job, and I thought I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go with my writing, because I looked at content writing for websites. I did a little of that. It destroys your soul. I did a little bit of ad work. God, no, never did.
Like copy editing?
Oh, yeah.
Writing copy?
Yeah, writing ad copy. And the thing was, a buddy of mine hired me, and it was for a place that was, you could go in and get a glass of wine, but you brought your dog with you, too. And then your dog could get something yummy too. I'm sure you don't like open up a bottle of Chardonnay for Fido. I hope not. At least there's probably laws against that. Hopefully, but no, the dog will get something cool to drink while you're enjoying and chilling out. And they had all kinds of dog products, and I had to do research on the dog products. I still remember more about bison-based dog products than any human being should be forced to memorize. And so, I like trivia, but that's just a little too much for me. But no, I was looking at how I would write and what I could do, and all I was doing was basically, okay, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that, and eventually it wound up being short stories, novels, and comic books. Well, I continued being Freelance Words from 2012 until 2016. I think it's 2016. Let me make sure. Yes, 2016. And what happened at that point was, I'm one of those people, I have a business plan. When I started this, I didn't say, okay, I'm going to start just writing and throwing, throwing stuff into the wind and hoping something comes back good. I actually sat down and I said, okay, here's my budget. Here are my goals. Here are my immediate goals, my long-term goals. Here are the benchmarks to know that I've made it. Here are the deadlines I'm giving myself. It's a standard business plan.
Right.
And as I started growing my business, which at the time was still just books, novels, I should say, I realized I've been getting a lot of favors that I didn't ask for. I didn't, please help me sort of thing. It was just like I was trying to pay it forward because I was getting a lot of great advice from people who had been in the industry forever. And I had some help from people who, back when I would do comic books, creator interviews for like Back Issue Magazine or Hogan's Alley, that they were doing me some solids. Right. And all you can do is just, pass it to the next person. It's the only way to really, most of us want to be repaid, I think. And I kept hearing this quote from the late John F. Kennedy, that a rising tide raises all boats. And I'd seen this again and again and again. It was one of the reasons why when DC did the New 52, yes, DC had like about a dozen titles or so the first month that sold over 1 million copies, which hadn't happened in 20 years, pretty much. Kind of like the onset of Image Comics back in the 90s. Yeah. But at the same time, people came into comic shops saying, "Oh, I want the Grant Morrison Action Comics. Oh, there's Spider-Man. I haven't read that in years." And it had kind of like a rising tide effect on other publishers. Right. And this phrase just kept running through my mind again and again and again. And I thought, I try to practice it. My closest friends in the industries practice it as well. Right. I need to change this completely greedy, appellation of my business name into something more in line with my own personal philosophy. So, starting with my Skyman book, I became Rising Tide Publications and I just mentioned Eric Hawkins again, who did the wonderful Zombiful World of Oz. Number 2 is currently on Indiegogo right now. I also plug my friends. I just mentioned one day I needed a logo, and of course I am like completely talentless in this regard. And so one day he sends me a DM saying check your email, and this was waiting for me, and it was everything I could have wanted. So that's the origin of Rising Tide, and we've been Rising Tide ever since, because it sounds corny, but we do believe in the philosophy, and we have seen it work, and it is working for me, and everyone that I see following it also works for them. So you got to put some faith in it, but it comes back tenfold.
Oh no, I agree. That's one of the reasons why I do this show is I try to get in. Like just before we started, I explained to you, like, I know a lot of people in the industry, so I invite my friends, but I also try to invite a lot of people I don't know. You understand? Because you want to give everybody an opportunity to be heard. You want everybody's story to be heard. You know what I mean?
Right.
You just
I do.
Exactly. You just want to bring them all in.
I do. Yeah. And as you know, I do some broadcasting myself. I do a 3 times daily show. Never mind the furthermore. 10 a.m. Mornings, 9 a.m. And plus, we've refurbished one of our shows at nighttime, Clever Title Pending. We now do interviews on it. And and it's more this show that I love it when people come in that I've never talked to before. That, suddenly I'm like, I want to know who you are. I want to know what you do. Tell me what you want to promote. Let's just start sharing ideas and stuff. Because originally the show I started about 4 years ago, and it was just going to be me and my colossal ego telling you how wonderful I am. Right. And after I got bored with myself, I noticed all the little comments you get on the side of the thing when you do Facebook Live. And I just started saying hello to people. And we started having this conversation. And I'm like, holy cats, this is a lot more interesting than me. And so I, opened up the thing, so, I started doing it more and more. In fact, during the onset of the current, what we call the My Sharona Miley Cyrus Peter pandemic, we were on every day, which I can assure you is nuts. We kept it up for about 2 months before I finally gave up. But I didn't give up. We started moving into the next phase of recovery. Right. But anyway, I was doing this every day. But the thing is, I do this, and people are starting to form real friendships in the gallery. And there were people like, hey, Brian, I'm an artist. Here's my website. And somebody else will say, hey, listen, I need an artist for this project I've got going. Or somebody will solicit writers in there. And or they'll say, hey, I've got this Kickstarter campaign. Could we get you to take a look at it? And we've had some people, we've helped them cross the finish line on it. I keep talking about how awesome my Nevermorians are. They're almost like a force of nature, and I'm insanely proud and protective of them all.
No, that's awesome, man. I mean, that's definitely the way to go. That's, like I said, this is what I'm trying to do here. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, you do a great job.
I'm trying. With Rising Tide Pub, now, is that just your self-publishing, or are you actually publishing other works from other people?
It started out as basically just me, all me, as a lot of people in self-publishing are. And but just this year, I finally decided that keeping with the Rising Tide philosophy, and for the fact that I wanted to put out more product without me having to write it all and have the subsequent nervous breakdown, I created a couple of anthologies, one of which is called Frightening Things, and it's kind of an ongoing horror anthology of varying lengths, and we don't really have a schedule for it. We're just waiting for enough good material to come in where we can justify a good-sized book. Currently, what I'm really working on is, it's taking most of my focus right now, is something called Doc Saga. And if you like the 30s adventurers from the pulps like Doc Savage and The Shadow, or if you like movies like The Rocketeer, which is one of my favorite movies ever, or Sky Captain or Indiana Jones, you know, he's an adventurer with a little bit of mysticism about him and all kinds of, you know, you can tell almost any story about this guy. And I've got half a dozen friends of mine who are writing stories about it. I've got half of them in already, and I'm just so excited because it's so cool to take a character, kind of put him together, and then say, here, would you do something with it? And then they see stuff that you don't, even as the creator. And I'm reading this stuff coming in, I'm like, you guys are better than I am, and I created him. Holy cats. So
are these prose, comics, combination of both?
It's going to be prose. We're going to be looking at putting some illustrations inside, just like the old pulps, from which I take a lot of cues in my own writing because I was raised on, like Doc Savage. I read the classics when I was really young, but then I got into Doc Savage because I saw that incredible cover on Curse of the Werewolf, and that led to like other pulp interests that I, just started going down that particular rabbit hole, which then kind of segued into the adventure novels of the 70s, like the Mac Bolan series or Remo Williams, the Destroyer, the Penetrator, Edge, all those crazy characters. And that's what informs a lot of my writing, both in prose and in comics, fast paced, hit the high points as far as character goes, wild concepts, that's the stuff that really speaks to me. So that's what the part I'm trying to bring to another generation. So
now, would you say that your influences are you as a writer, are you more heavily influenced from, let's say, comics or prose?
Honestly, a lot of my influences are distinctly comic books because I read more of them when I was, really studying, trying to put together my storytelling skills as a kid. Because and you read a lot of the classics, that crap is dry. You've really got to want to read some of that stuff. It's and the thing is, a lot of teachers don't know how to sell it.
No.
Yeah. It's like I had a teacher, like I knew Stan Lee was a huge Shakespeare fan. Right. And Shakespeare the language makes it very impenetrable to a lot of people. It's tough to understand iambic pentameter in a lot of cases, and the little tricks that Shakespeare would use to close out scenes in rhyme and things like this. I had a high school teacher who said, we're going to study Shakespeare next week. And I'm like, yeah, let's study Shakespeare. That's going to be great. Stan Lee loves him. I love him too. I'm going to love this one. And then the teacher sat down. Of course, at the time I was living in this very small community in East Central Illinois, basically a wide spot in the cornfield. And he he started the class and spent the next 20 minutes telling the class why he hates Shakespeare, why he thinks it's garbage, and he's only teaching it because the school board made him. And that is the sort of thing that just kills me when people try to actively discourage people from reading. I mean, when I was in high school, they had a revival of, this is not a real popular one to admit to seeing this week, but Gone with the Wind. Okay. Big epic. I'd never seen it. I hadn't even seen it. This is back in the days before video. Right. And DVD. So I had heard about it from my parents, but I had no clue what it was about. And it was making a tour of theaters that summer. And so we had the Scholastic Book Club. Right. I love the Scholastic Book Club with a passion because it's like Christmas once a month for me. And so I ordered Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind. And the teacher's opening up the package, and he's like, "Okay, here's your Peanuts, reprints. Here's, the Berenstain Bears. Who, Margaret Mitchell? Who ordered this crap? And like me, So yeah, a lot of my influences were distinctly comic book, which is kind of funny because then it brought me back into prose because, Stan Lee. big influence. Gardner Fox. Then finding out that he was also a prose writer. John Broome. Then going into like Steve Englehart, Roy Thomas, who I think is a brilliant man.
Yeah.
Steve Gerber, David Anthony Kraft, and Paul Kupperberg, and a whole lot of these great writers who also did prose. So I kind of bound in between them, but I think the majority of my influences did come from comic book writers. Part of it was the turn of phrase. A lot of it, though, was plotting and being freaking courageous about what you write. Because especially in the early 70s, when you had that wave of fans turned prose, like Steve Englehart and Jim Starlin, and suddenly you're seeing this stuff where all of a sudden there's no limits.
Yep.
And how can you not be influenced by that and try to bring your own spin to this stuff? So this is mostly comic books, but it also informed my a lot of the stuff I was doing was not exactly high literature. You don't read all 39 Mac Bolan and expect to understand the human condition when you're done. So,
I asked that question because it's funny. Like I've read comics since I was probably about 8 or 9.
Oh yeah.
And but around 12, that's when I started reading novels. But I started off reading like Asimov.
Asimov, right? He's another one.
I started off reading Asimov and Herbert and Michael Moorcock and Fritz Leiber, and those are the guys. Those are the stuff that I started reading. And probably a couple years later, I started reading Lovecraft. And and it's just like, and then I was like, wait a second. I found a huge disparity between reading Heinlein and reading an X-Men comic. And I was like, come on. I found that as a young kid, for me, I always find it funny. Although I did find Alan Moore and at a very young age, and Frank Miller. Before Watchmen and before Dark Knight, I found them before that. So it was just really interesting. I was just, it's one of those things that I can only ask another writer.
Right. And the thing is, Moore and Gaiman and all these guys like that, the real high thinkers, they're you can tell they're very well read.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You almost like Alan Moore stuff. I am in awe of Alan Moore. I remember was a Saga of the Swamp Thing 24 with that opening page talking about the Justice League of America.
Right.
Seriously, it took me years to read that and not cry out of the, just out of sheer appreciation, as, like every issue, under most of the JLA writers, Justice League writers were all like, the Justice League in their satellite headquarters, 23,000 miles above the earth. And, suddenly here you have like here is a place above the earth. You have a man with wings on his back. There's a man who can see across the planet and wring diamonds from its anthracite. And I remember picking that up at the shop where I was working at the time, and seriously, like tears were flowing down my face because this is just like so beautiful. This is like word candy to me. So it's just just made a huge impact on me.
Yeah. I think the first one I ever read of his was the one where, God, what was her name? Abigail? Was that his?
His
girlfriend? Yeah. The first time I think they consummated their relationship, and she ate the fruit off of him.
Yes.
And it was like an acid trip in comic form, and I was like 13. And I got to read this, really enjoy this. And I was just like, oh, this is insane.
My God. Yeah. And the issues, like the first issue, I think it was where they didn't get the comics code. And where Abby was like, she had realized she'd been making out with a dead guy that was related to her. And, describing things she was using to cleanse herself in a very sensitive area. And then the ghosts were starting to tell, the most horrible things to her. And the one that got me, that just like stopped me in my tracks, was Mommy Needn't Know.
Right.
I was like, oh my God. It was crazy. And the funny thing was, and I wrote an article about this for Back Issue Magazine from Tomorrow's. They had distributed, DC had distributed a videotape to dealers where they interviewed like Len Wein, who was editing the book at the previously, I think Karen Berger and Alan Moore. And he just, he looks like Rasputin. And he gets his, and at one point they talk about, the fact that the code wasn't covering this book, the comics code wasn't approving this book. And he gets, he's just kind of hunched over and you see this little mischievous twinkle in his eye. And he's, in that northern accent of his, he's like, well, I guess I forgot that incest and necrophilia are still, frowned upon in your country. The man has got an incredible sense of humor that comes through with things like DR and Quinch and stuff. You forget about that sometimes when you see his really humorous stuff or his serious stuff, which scares the out of you. So
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about your new project, Terraform Publishing. So
yes.
So what's going on with this? I mean, what is it? What are you guys looking to accomplish?
Make comic books, and it's one of those things where the thing that amazes me is that we've got half a dozen people who are all rowing in the same direction, and all of us have accomplishments. We've got resumes between us, and we're putting our egos aside so that we can produce the best work we can. Sometimes, I found myself, I keep kidding really that I've got this, enormous ego that can blot out the sun. That's so dense it has its own gravitic field. But the thing is, it is such a relief. It's partly a defense to protect your work, I think, in a lot of cases, especially when you're dealing with people who may or may not be on the same capability plane as you are.
Right.
And, I love working with new people. Don't get me wrong about that. But sometimes you have an idea, and for whatever reason, like the person I mentioned earlier that, just shot off the script first opportunity he got, you defend yourself. You defend the integrity of your work. Right. And that's what we're all into, but we're also looking out for each other's integrity in our work, in the work too. And if anyone's curious, so we've got Luke Stone, who did, just happened to have it here, Hybrid Sons of Gods, very successful Kickstarter recently. Nice. Also, Rob Anderson, who produces a variety of magazines, but this one, I love this book, seriously. This is a great all ages book. Teaches a great lesson. Plus, we've got Varian Grant from Indie Volt Radio, great broadcaster, great artist and writer. Eric Hodson, who does, I wrote it down so I wouldn't make sure I wouldn't get it wrong, Dinosaur Man. Which is an online comic. He's an incredible artist. He's the art director. Meredith Logren, who is the comics noob, and she is currently on a journey to create her first comic book. And she sent me the first draft of the script, and it wasn't anything that was in the format I showed you earlier that I'm used to. But in all honesty, and I'd say this even if she weren't here, that and she might be here watching me, wondering what I'm doing. But anyway, which is valid. But no, she wrote something where you see all the pieces, and you're thinking, once this is developed, this is going to be fantastic. So we've got artists, we've got writers, and we're all wanting to create solid comic books. We want to create. We've talked about between us, we're not big fans of decompressed storytelling. Okay. Like in the last 20 years, like you look at old comics, say even up to like the 90s, and you put 6 of them in a trade paperback. Right. Well, they may all tell a little bit of story. Kree Skrull War by Roy Thomas and Neil Adams and John Buscema is a great example of this, where you have this sweeping arc. This huge cosmic story, this amazing battle, but every chapter stands on its own. Because like with regular comics, you're getting one monthly dose of it, and but the problem is, pain in the backside for me as an old comic reader that instead, we have this, you don't have that sweeping arc. You just have one story that could have fit in 1 or 2 issues, but you've got it chopped up into 6 pieces, and you've got it padded with, people flying around and thinking, and you got, they're running around going, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So we are looking for something a little bit more classic, where you pick up the individual issues and you get your money's worth out of it. It's a solid read. It sits on its own, but there are elements that maybe can be played forward into the next issue or issues. So we're looking at a, kind of like a classic, solid storytelling base, wild imaginings. Not hardly anything's off the table as far as we're concerned. And like I said, Dinosaur Man is coming. This will be the first time it's in print, because it's been like an ebook up to this point. And Cat Dad and Supermom are going to get editions from the new company. Luke Stone has brought his Hybrid Sons of Gods. Plus, we'll be doing new stuff. So I'll be doing a pulp-influenced, of course, a title called Sunset Trace. Steelyard City is being cleaned up by Scarlet Trace, and everyone knows who she is, except for Scarlet Trace. Yeah, so and we're going to be playing into the start of the Roaring '20s and the start of organized crime in this country. But we're starting it in 1918. This is not the first pandemic we've ever had to deal with. Back then, we did, and I did some research on it. We should all be glad we're here. It was scary back then. It seriously was. And I, as I was putting together this character, I'm thinking, man, this would be a great setting for, a two-fisted adventure character with just a few differences, straight out of the pulps. This is somebody that probably would have, known, had Doc Savage's home address or something. So I'm excited by it. I really am. And Luke Stone's going to be penciling it, so it'll be fun.
Oh, nice. No, okay. That's awesome. I mean, cool. Now, now you guys looking to go through Diamond, or are you going to be like doing Kickstarters? I mean, what type of initial plans do you have?
If I were a worse guess, my answer would be yes. And we'd leave it at that. No, the thing is, a number of us have Kickstarter experience. Plus, Varian Grant has his own distribution network with several prominent shops. We are looking at Diamond for a number of our products, or our projects rather. Some things will not be suitable for Diamond. Some things may just go, onto the web or whatever, or we will deal directly with a number of shops on our own. We're basically not saying no to anything. And my understanding is, again, I'm not that business guy. I just kind of drift off when they start talking numbers. There's a reason I didn't go in. I went into journalism because there was no math requirement. But anyway, the thing is, we're looking for the most effective ways to get our work out to the public and, get in as many hands as possible. I think I really have a lot of faith in this line and the people behind it. So,
no, sounds awesome. Looking forward to seeing a lot of this stuff.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you won't be disappointed.
Good. Now, we've been at this for a little bit, so we're coming to a close, but we're not done yet. All right?
Oh, so good.
All right, great. So before I start off on some of my goofier questions,
bring them.
I always ask this one question, everybody.
Okay.
It's just, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about?
That's an excellent question, actually. And when I did interviews, I always ended mine with, what did I forget to ask you? So kudos to you, young man. I can't think of a thing. You've been very, very, very thorough about this. I will say that, another comic connection I forgot to mention, when I first got into novel writing, and of course I had tried to write novels, and I finally figured it out. Being unemployed will do that to you. You got a lot of time to think. Yeah. Kindle, or Amazon at the time, had a project called Kindle Worlds, where they licensed various intellectual properties, like Vampire Diaries or Veronica Mars, and they later expanded this. But one of the things they had was the Valiant Comics line. So it's out of print now because they discontinued this program with Amazon. But my very first book was a Bloodshot book called The Coldest Warrior, and I had two reasons why I did this. One was that I love Bloodshot. That was my favorite Valiant character, and I thought it had incredible possibilities, so it would be easy for me to write. Plus, being a mercenary, I thought I can tap into a pre-existing fandom for it. And I have to say, until they killed the program, that book sold very well for me, and I was like number 2 hot pick of the month in the all of the Kindle worlds. So that didn't hurt my ego much, although I will say that I expected to sell 100 copies the first month, and I only sold 20, and I'm like, I'm crestfallen. And everybody's like, you sold 20 copies? And that's when I realized how bad the book market was in a lot of cases. But like I said, I'm incredibly fond of that book, and I wish I could bring it back, but I think I'd have to license it through Valiant, so which at this point in time is kind of problematic. So maybe.
You never know. Yeah. Hope springs eternal.
I do.
Yes. Now.
Yes.
All right, we're gonna go on to some of my fun questions.
Okay.
So now, you're a writer. You're creating a comic book. Now, if you had your choice of any artist, living or dead, a comic artist that you could get to illustrate, produce a cover for you. Don't worry about the budget.
Okay.
Who would it be?
Wow. I think it would depend on the project. I will share that Sunset Trace, when Luke Stone was asking me what kind of artist would you like, I said Alex Toth. Nice. And I think Alex Toth would be a good choice for most of my covers. Of course, I'd love to have a Neil Adams or like a Jack Kirby or a John Buscema, obviously. Ron Frenz would be another one, because I love how he's one of the few artists who really, aside from Rich Buckler, knows how to balance the energy of Kirby and the balance of Kirby. When he's throwing a punch, you see that other arm going back. And along with the slickness of a John Buscema. So Ron Frenz would probably be my main one, but Alex Toth would be probably on my more pulp-oriented stuff, because I love how. As his, I saw his old stuff in the 40s and 50s, and it was very Cy-Berry, detail and stuff in it. But as the 60s progressed, all the feathering and all the line work vanished, and all it was stark black and white. And was still with powerful storytelling, still with good emotion. Every element you needed in that illustration was there from Alex Toth. So unfortunately, Alex had a troubled, personal life and didn't produce as much work as he could have. But the work he produced is just like absolutely breathtaking, and it looks as good in black and white as it does in color. So Alex Toth would be one of my choices. Ron Frenz would be probably right behind him. So,
gotcha. All right, cool, good choices. I like them.
Thank you.
Now, let's say if you got the golden ticket and you got the call up, and they said, listen, Brian, take your pick. Any character, any group from any of the various companies. Doesn't necessarily have to be Marvel or DC. It could be any of these companies. All right. And they said, who would you want to write? And who would you want to illustrate it?
Ooh, sweet question there. And believe it or not, my fanboy side, and this has been something since I was like about 10 years old, Thunder Agents.
Wow. Okay.
From the old Tower comics. I remember I looking at them on the stands and thinking, superpowered secret agents is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Of course, I'm 10. I don't have a lot to base this on. But then I noticed Wally Wood did the art in there. And then I'm flipping through and I'm seeing people like George Tuska, who drew Iron Man for so many years, and John Giunta, who did a slew of science fiction stories in the 50s and drew The Fly and Fly Girl in the 60s, and just like all these incredible artists. Steve Ditko, for God's sakes, inked by Wally Wood. It doesn't get much better than that. And the stories, you could read one and it was real fast-paced Cold War stories. Next one is science fiction. The next one is almost romance. The next one is like jungle adventure. The next one is funny. And you had this incredible variety of genres just in one book, and the same character could be appearing in several of these stories, changing in the genre. So I love Thunder Agents. I have always loved Thunder Agents. Now, who would I get to draw it now? Again, I would go for somebody like a Ron Frenz, who's a strong storyteller. Otherwise, it would probably be my friend Eric Hawkins, because we get along so well, and I think it'd be the kind of project he'd dig doing. So, that'd be my strong choice. As much as I love Superman and a lot of the characters, I do tend to gravitate towards the different ones, the more obscure stuff. And that's probably one I would love to write one day, is Thunder Agents.
Cool. Sounds awesome. I'd like to see that.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I got a few comparatives. So, I'll softball you with the first couple.
Okay.
So, Captain America or Batman?
Wow. The thing is, I kind of give an edge to Captain America because I think he's been better written over the years. I don't subscribe to the idea of the cowled psychopath. In fact, I like Steve Englehart's version of him from Detective Comics, where he's not crazy. Bruce Wayne is the sanest man in Gotham, but he's not always written that way. So I think Captain America I would give a slight edge to. Although Batman is one of those characters, it is really close second with me. But Captain America, I've got to go with him.
Okay. Godzilla or Gamera?
Oh, Godzilla, of course. He's the big G. I mean, come on. Everybody else is like, they came about because of Godzilla. So, and there's just something about Godzilla is just so freaking awesome. Besides, it gave us one of the best Blue Oyster Cult songs ever. So, I can't fault the big G for that one. And he's teamed up with Charles Barkley. So,
all right, I'll throw you some questions I don't normally throw at people because you're a writer.
Bring them.
Robert E. Howard or Fritz Lieber?
Ooh. I think as far as energy and imagination go, I prefer Howard. But as far as skillful prose, I think I give it to Lieber. I still love Fawford and the Grey Mouser, but Robert E. Howard, the more I read about him and read his works, Conan is wonderful. And I actually prefer Cull to his Cull tales to his Conans, but there's just such an energy and a real vitality about Howard's prose. I think I'd give the advantage to Howard in this case.
Okay. Fair enough. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or Agatha Christie?
Doyle.
Okay.
Sheer Doyle, because he is the guy who basically created the type of characters that Agatha Christie wrote. If you ignore his I find myself fascinated by Conan Doyle versus Houdini and the whole spiritualism thing. That the man who writes the most logical man in the world, will falls for these scams. There's just something amazing about that. But the strength of his writing and the consistency of it, even during the times when you can tell, I want to kill Sherlock with every fiber of my being. I'm sick of this. I want to write Professor Challenger, which also is pretty good stuff. But yeah, I have to give it to Doyle. He was such an innovative writer that I have got to give a little bit, tip the needle towards him.
Okay. No, it's funny for myself. When I was about 13, 14 years old, I just got into Agatha Christie kick, and I read like 5 or 6 or 7 of her books in a row, and I just got into this huge kick. And I love the woman; she was incredible.
Oh, I do. I agree with you completely. I mean, it's I'm not trying to diss Agatha at all, and she's another one. She's incredibly talented. I do like a lot of the British stuff. I grew up reading like Leslie Charteris, on Saint, and John Creasy, who basically was one of the top police procedural writers of Britain. So I've read a lot of British stuff, and I just love the heck out of it. But yeah, Agatha Christie, I cannot say a bad thing about her. She was an incredible talent. I will give you that.
Now, Asimov or Heinlein?
Wow. I think I have to give it to Asimov because just giving us the 3 laws of robotics, it just is some of his his relationship to my imagination. Now, I grew up reading more Heinlein. It wasn't until I got into high school that I really discovered Asimov. But I grew up reading the space opera stuff by Heinlein and just absolutely loving it. In fact, Heinlein's my wife's favorite writer, I think. She's got like all of the books and all the books about the books. So, and she made me read The Number of the Beast when we were engaged. She goes, "This explains me," and I'm like, "Well, I'm marrying you anyway." But anyway, I have to give it to Asimov because I not only was a fan of his science fiction, but I also was a huge fan of his factual work too. He wrote a lot of nonfiction works that are incredibly well researched, well documented. And, I guess I kind of like authors who are as versatile as possible, so they can possibly be in their writing. And Asimov, of course, he was also one of those guys that was just so incredibly prolific. He's from that generation like Walter Gibson or Lester Dent, who basically beat typewriters to death with their fingertips, as I call it. And there's just something just so elemental about that I just can't help but love it.
Yeah, I have a friend who worked with is it Randy Zimmerman? No, it's not Randy Zimmerman. It's another Zimmerman. Okay. But I forget his name. But my friend, his mentor, and I forget his name. I think his last name is Zimmerman.
Okay.
Interviewed Asimov for Starlog.
Oh wow.
And
Howard Zimmerman.
Yes. Yes, Howard Zimmerman. So he says he goes into his living room and in a circle is 7 typewriters, each with a different story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just like, wow, that is like insanity. It's like seriously,
yeah.
And he would just, I guess he would just go at one and then be like, okay, let me go to the other one.
Wow. Holy cats. That is amazing. Yeah, I heard the same thing about Walter Gibson because at one point, he was writing not only the Shadow books, but he was like doing script doctoring on the other writers that would be put in to give him like a little breathing space. And he was writing radio, and he was writing books about Houdini, and he was writing Shadow comics and the newspaper strip. And he had like all this going, and he was still writing on the average 1 Shadow book every week for about 5 years. That's nuts.
That is nuts. Yeah, that is crazy.
And he's also an incredible writer too. I read his books on Houdini, and I was just like gobsmacked. I couldn't believe it. He brought so much information to it that that's why another reason I love the older writers.
Yeah, they that type of work ethic. Oof.
Yeah, and that's the thing I get told a lot. That people like about me is my work ethic because I am fairly prolific. And because these guys are my heroes, and I just pretend I'm back in 1930 and that's the only way I've got to eat, is to like get paid by the word and get this stuff out there.
Right.
And that's something I think a lot more creators could stand to learn, that, you had guys like Kirby. You know why he drew 6 pages a day? Because he had to.
Yeah,
he had a family. He had to put a roof over their heads. He had to pay the bills. And, unfortunately, I think we've gotten into this, if I may editorialize for a moment, this idea of the creator as rock star, which, that's nice, but I don't subscribe to that at all. I just see myself, just carrying on like in the tradition of, like the Don Pendletons and the Richard Sappiers and Warren Murphys and, Lester Dents and Robert Blocks of the world, where we put the stuff out because we know we've only got a limited time on this planet, and we've got all these stories in our head that we just, we feel the urge to tell, and we know that nobody else can do it like us. And so, that's why I want to get as much work out as I can, and try to encourage people to do the same.
Yep. No, that's perfectly fine. All right. I got a few more, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'm having fun. I'm ready for all of them. Bring them on, buddy.
Right. Byrne or Perez?
Wow. Oh, now this is difficult. And the thing is, I've met both of them, and George is one of the nicest people on the planet, and it sounds like I'm one of the few people that didn't have a problem with John. I have to say, I give a slight edge to, again, slight edge. Nobody's like a clear winner in my world, apparently, or I'm too wishy-washy to commit. But I give George Perez because Perez detail is astounding. And John Byrne, not to take away from John, because John is, like George, he's a multiple threat. He can pencil, he can write, he can ink. And, and the thing is, those two have produced such amazing bodies of work that, I just think that there's something about the work of Perez that speaks to me a little bit more than John. But again, it is just by a hair's breadth, because John Byrne is just such an amazing talent.
Yeah, but George Perez is a very sweet man. Met him a few times. Very sweet man. Now, I have an interesting story about John Byrne, though.
Oh, let's hear it. Yeah.
All right. It wasn't myself. It was a couple of friends. We went to Pittsburgh Comic-Con, and John Byrne just happened to be there. We were 2 or 3 years into our little publishing thing back in the early 90s. And my artist, he takes his book, and he goes over to John Byrne, and he brings it to him, and he says, "Mr. Byrne, I brought this for you." And John Byrne takes it, and he flips over, and he says, "Wow, this is really nice." He says, "You drew this?" He said, "Yeah." He says, "I drew this," and he says, "I wanted you to have a copy." And John Byrne was like, "Oh," he said, "Would you sign it for me?" And he signed it for him. And then John Byrne asked him, and it was him and another friend of mine. And he was just like, "Did you guys bring something for me to sign?" And they were like, "Oh no, we didn't even know you were going to be at the show." Right. And he was like, "Oh, okay. You know what? Don't even worry about it. I got something right here." So he reaches underneath his table and he says, "A dealer had brought me a case of these." And it was, I don't remember what issue it is exactly, but it was the very first issue that he illustrated on the Fantastic Four.
For 232, yes.
Yeah, it's the one where I think I forgot the name. He has all of them hanging upside down.
Yeah, Diablo.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, great issue.
He pulls out 2 copies and he signs them and he gives it to them. My 2 friends come back to the table. They're floating. They're floating. They're floating. They're like,
seriously.
Like, yeah. And I was just like, because I hear a lot of bad things sometimes said about John Byrne. I'm like, look, everybody has a bad day. Maybe he has more than some others, but when he has a good day, man, he has a good day.
Yeah. Well, I've got 2 stories about Byrne. One was I wasn't involved with one of them, but I read a story that John Byrne had met this little girl, and she had one of his comics and said, "Would you sign this, Mr. Byrne?" And so he signs it on the cover, the ink and everything, and, hands it back to her. And she goes, "Well, will this be worth a lot of money someday, Mr. Byrne?" He goes, "You kidding? There's ink all over that cover. Are you joking?" And she bursts into tears. She starts crying, and he's like, "Oh my God, no, it'll be worth a fortune. Oh, please stop crying." He just broke him up like that. But he used to go to Mid Ohio Con in Columbus, Ohio, and I would see him every year, and we had, it's not like he knew my name or anything, but he recognized me, knew that, I could take it. I could take him being Byrne. It's fine. And I always like to bring autographable stuff. And I always like to bring one thing that is like from some obscure corner of their career. And so I brought 3 comics and I said, "Could you sign these for me?" He goes, "Oh yeah, sure. I'd be glad to." So he puts them down, and one was Superman, Man of Steel, #1. 1986. So he signs it, puts it off to one side. Next one is the restart of the Amazing Spider-Man that he and Howard Mackey did back in the 80s, 90s, whatever. And so he signs that. Takes the next comic from Charlton Comics, Emergency #1.
Wow.
He lets out this high-pitched scream,
Uh-huh.
and all the room goes quiet.
Mhm.
And I'm like, crap. Because everyone is now looking at who made Mr. Burns scream. And I'm like, oh, dear God, I'm not surviving this encounter. And just at that moment, it seemed like it lasted about 12 hours or something. Byrne holds up the comic, the Charlton comic, and his best friend, Roger Stern, started going, look what this guy brought. Look what this guy brought. And Stern starts laughing.
Right.
And then the thing, I think he saw how terrified I was. I was going to get torn apart by his fans. And then John Byrne spends the next 10 minutes talking to me and telling me the history of this comic to him and why he signed it Byrne Robotics rather than with his real name. The reason why was on Friday afternoon, he gets a call. And George Wildman, the editor, says, hey, listen, I've got this emergency comic book based on the NBC series, and we need somebody that can capture the likenesses. Can you get this done? And he goes, yeah, I'll be glad to. At the time, he's like, this is before he went to Marvel and DC, so he'll take any assignment you give him. This man drew Wheelie the Chopper Bunch for 6 months. And so, he said, yeah, what's my deadline? And the editor told him, Monday.
Yep.
So he didn't write the script, but that was Joe Gill, but he he penciled and inked and lettered that comic in 3 days. Damn. Now, he wasn't real happy with the result, so that's why he signed it Byrne Robotics. It was kind of like a little jab about being like a cog in the machine and having to grind out this work. But he spent this time, and then he goes on to tell me about his favorite inkers, which, kind of surprised me. At the time, he only had one person he really liked inking him, Tony DeZuniga,
really?
The co-creator of Jonah Hex. Because if you look at Byrne's line work, it was not slick like Joe Sinnott or or Terry Austin's,
right?
But he did, like, DeZuniga inked one issue of Marvel Team Up over Byrne, and that was the closest to how Byrne felt he should be inked, mainly the way he did himself. So anyway, there's a little bit of trivia for you. You ask me the time, and I give you the history of clockmaking. So anyway,
sounds good. Sounds good.
All right.
Let's see, Lovecraft or Poe?
Poe, clearly Poe. And I'm not even talking about the misogyny and bigotry that you find. Poe had his problems too, but Poe, there is just something so moody and truly evocative about his work that I think it's a little more sensual than Lovecraft. Now, Lovecraft can, turn your bowels to water, but but Poe could do it, and it's like when you read The Raven, you feel like you're in the room. And I have to say, he's one of the first authors. I read my first Poe when I was probably about 8 years old, and the first thing I read was the Cask of Amontillado. Okay. And just the idea that this guy is so drunk he doesn't notice he's being killed and he's about to get killed, and that then he screams at the end, for the love of God, Montressor, and it's like that just that didn't make for very easy nights for Brian going to bed for a while. So I have to give it to Poe for for that reason. But again, not taking away anything from Lovecraft, he had such an amazing imagination in just thinking in non-linear ways, even to the point where the laws of physics didn't apply to some of his alien characters. That really knocked me out when I discovered him in the 70s.
Calvin and Hobbes or Pogo?
Wow. I have to give the edge to Calvin and Hobbes. Okay. Because unfortunately, I was Calvin when I was growing up. I had the imaginary friend. I had stuffed animals. I was constantly moving from one bit of trouble to the next with my parents. And if anyone would have constructed a snowman hall of horrors, it would have been me at the time. Now, I love Pogo. I think the one thing that kind of while it is a good mirror of how American politics worked, especially in the 50s and 60s, I actually prefer the pre-Pogo work, because there's a lot of innocence and childlike wonder in it. But he just came up with so many lines. My favorite of which, "We have met the enemy, and he is us." There's a lot of wisdom in Pogo, but I have to give it to Calvin and Hobbes in this case.
Okay, we'll do two more, and we'll call it a night.
All right.
Sandman or Swamp Thing. Now this is Alan Moore Swamp Thing.
Okay, and I take it you're talking
Neil Gaiman.
About Neil Gaiman, as opposed to say Simon and Kirby's or anything.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. As much as I love Moore's imagination, and as groundbreaking as the stuff he did in Swamp Thing, and how much it influenced a number of us in the writing field, I give the edge to. I can reread Sandman all day long and have, because again, like Thunder Agents, you can have one issue where you're exploring like this obscure character from Metamorpho, Element Girl, and suddenly you really care about her. And then you have stories where it, like the Arabian Nights in number 50.
That's an incredible issue.
Oh my God, just again, perfect synthesis of art and story with Gaiman and P. Craig Russell. Yeah, and but you could tell all this variety of stories, even to the point where, and I find this really amazing, where you don't need the lead character to have an impact on the story, but you set it in that milieu, and then you explore the effect of it on the people trapped inside there. It's mostly because of, and again, Gaiman's an amazing writer. And again, you've got humor, you've got action, you've got, stuff that'll, make you pee green for a week, sort of thing.
Right.
So, again, hair's breadth, but I give it to Sandman simply because of the rereadability of it. And it doesn't rely so much on the mainstream DC universe as Swamp Thing did. So
true. Okay, I like it. Here's the last one.
All right,
Kirby or Ditko?
I think Kirby. I would give it to Kirby, although I think Ditko was an amazing designer. His objectivist, the more you learn about his objectivist stance, I'm like, okay, that's nice. But Kirby, just his sheer action, his sheer inventiveness, his layouts, and just all that he brought to comics as a creator, and his versatility. Here's another artist who, we know him from Fantastic Four, we know him from Thor, and the old Sandman and the Manhunter and Commandy. But we forget he drew Love comics for years. He drew a year's worth of Our Fighting Forces with the Losers, where, as far as he knew, there was no continuity. Like, he just got these characters. He didn't do nothing with any of the subplots before it. He didn't give a rip about anything and follow him. But he did a year where you could tell that he's drawing on his own experiences from this, because there was kind of a grittiness to it that you could feel in his writing. And he wasn't the best dialogue guy in the world, but then again, neither was Ditko. So, but it's just what Kirby brought to the industry. That I constantly say that we stand on the shoulders of titans. You, me, everyone in the comics creation field. And Kirby just had done so much in his amazing career that I just have to give him, again, a bit more than a hair's breadth, I think, but just the same, I have to give it to Kirby for versatility and for basically redefining how we look at comics and how comics are presented.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. So, Brian, before we go, let everybody know, where can they find you? Where can they find your work? Where can they find Brian K. Morris and Rising Tide Publishing?
Well, it just so happens, if you go to Amazon and Smashwords, you can pick up my books. We do horror. Also, it's a how-to on how to write comics. I'm also in some other science fiction and horror books from other people. We also do, if you like pulp, we've got Skyman, revives the old character from Columbia Comics, plus my own creation, Volcana. We're writing the sequel later this year. And of course, this book has sold on 3 continents. Santa Sign. It's a tale told with much inappropriate humor. So I'm sure none of your listeners would enjoy that sort of thing, I'm sure. But anyway, I can be found on Rising Tide Publications. I also have a Facebook page, also Rising Tide Publications there. Where also I'm on YouTube currently. I'm at Camouflage 61821. We've got to get that changed because it's an old role-playing character I had and where I was living. We got to get something that everyone can remember. Anyway, Rising Tide Publications on Smashwords and Amazon, and also 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday on YouTube as well as Facebook. We do Never Mind the Furthermore. It's an interactive talk show, and you are the guests, folks. And we have a lot of fun doing that. And also Clever Title Pending every Tuesday night, where we talk about creativity and the business behind it. And this coming week, this coming Tuesday, we're going to have a very special pulp-oriented, series-oriented pair of writers. Charles F. Milhouse and the incredible Bobby Nash will be joining me for about 2 hours of talk. And we insist that you bring your questions because, one, this is how you're going to learn this stuff because you get to grill 2 experts. And 2, it takes a lot of heat off of me and I don't have to make up so many questions. Anyway. That's how you do it. And thank you for having me, JD. Right. It has been a total blast. It really has.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And like I said, everybody, please like, subscribe, let people know that the podcast is going on, share it out, and let everybody know we're here for you. So thank you so much. Go check out Tall Tales on the Kickstarter, and I'll be talking to you all soon. Have a good one, guys. Have a good night.